did it both in Greek and Arabian terms.
And of course, an important point that you bring out in your book is that the Quranic vision of, I mean, if you look at the Quranic idea of paradise, you say that it almost seems like a world parliament of religions, because all of these people are included over there. But I mean, apart from the eschatological significance of these things or the salvific significance, these are, I mean, this is also an important point from the view of the, the Prophet's social milieu and how he wanted to direct his society here below as above.
Yeah, I'm arguing that that the vision of heaven in the Quran, which is a concern of the Quran to depict heaven quite extensively. I think much more so than is the case in the Bible. Only the book of Revelation, I think, goes as far. But in the Quran, there are many verses about life in the next world, life in heaven. And I don't think that it's that we're being told these things as an abstraction. I think the Quran is suggesting that people should model themselves after the ideal life, which is presented in heaven. So at one point it says that people won't keep grudges in heaven. And I read the Quran to disapprove of people keeping grudges. There won't be any harsh words. So the Quran disapproves of gossip and backbiting and taunting and so forth. The big theme I see in the Quranic depiction of heaven is the Arabic salam, which means peace, prosperity, and security. It's kind of all of those things rolled up into one. So in the Quran, when one dies and goes to heaven, one is greeted at the entrance to heaven by the angels. What do they say? Peace be upon you, enter. Then once you're inside, you, the other denizens of heaven, the other people who are already there, and you greet each other with peace. And then there are enjoyments and delights. But the ultimate, the highest, is when the voice of God addresses you there in your afterlife and says peace. So I think that peace is the keynote of heaven, but in this sense of peace, calmness, but security, prosperity, well-being. We now have, this rash of books, just bestsellers on happiness and well-being and how to attain it. I think that's very much what the Quran is depicting when it talks about heaven.
It almost seems as if the Quran is obsessed with peace, the kind of way you're describing it.
It's a very major concern of the Quran.
Yeah.
Peace, security, prosperity, these concepts that are around the word salam. And there's also another word that's used, sulh, which has to do with conciliation, reconciliation, peacemaking. There's sakina, which is the peace of God. So there's, there are nice concordances and also now electronic databases of words in the Quran. So I went through and made these lists of all of the times the word peace appears and what context it appears in and so forth. And I saw this progression that the first big cluster of mentions is about heaven. And then there's another cluster of peace verses where it's talking about interpersonal relationships and your civic responsibilities. So what do you do if somebody insults your religion, insults you and your religion, and makes life hard for you, harasses you? So there are many verses in the Quran, in kind of the middle Quran period, middle Mecca period, which insist the way you deal with that is that you pray for peace for them. You pray for their security, well-being, prosperity, and peace, if they have been mean to you. And in some ways, the Quran goes beyond what Jesus says in the New Testament, in that it commands that you do good to those who do evil to you. And there's a dialogic relationship. And it promises that if you treat these people who are treating you badly, if you treat them well, that ultimately you'll transform them in some way, so that your enemy would become your patron, wali. So there's a theory in the Quran of peace work, of what you would do to get social peace. And it requires a great deal of humility and self-control, because I know it's hard when somebody's shouting at you, and we all have this experience now in the internet of people coming on and abusing you. It's hard to reply in a peaceful way that wishes them well. But that's what the Quran is advising. And I think the Quran hoped that, Mecca was a sanctuary city. It was a place where fighting was forbidden. It was a haram and a hama. You weren't allowed to hunt there or to cut down trees around the Kaaba. And I think the values of peace that are in the Quran come from that notion of a space of sanctuary and peacefulness. And of course, the Banu Hashim, which are Muhammad's clan, according to the later Muslim tradition, were in charge of keeping the peace. They were in charge of the Kaaba and the pilgrim trade and so forth. So they had to settle feuds. That was probably part of what the Prophet was doing. He was a community organizer who settled disputes even before his prophecy. And so I think the Quran exhibits a hope that these practices of peace, of essentially turning the other cheek and wishing well and doing well, not just wishing well, but doing well to your persecutors, would spread out from Mecca so that the whole world would become a sanctuary where practices of peace would be the norm.